Hello, my name is Pooja. Welcome to Sunday's special episode of Around the World in 7 Days. The discussion of global politics is incomplete without discussing the geopolitics of the Middle East. It is also generally said that the Middle East is the only region in the world that always remains in the headlines due to its geopolitics. In the last several episodes of our program, we have been informing you that the politics of the Middle East are indicating signs of changes in the geopolitics. We have been emphasizing that the hold of the US in the Middle East is now weakening and other superpowers such as Russia and China are expanding their roots in the Middle East. Now our speculation has almost come true. Now a question arises on what basis we are making such claims. Actually, the strategic alliances that taught world polarization during the Cold War are now becoming ineffective. During the Cold War, the Middle East was witnessing comparatively more foreign interferences and several conflicts. The events like the Israel-Arab War, the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and the Iran-Arab War shows that the Middle East was highly unstable during the Cold War. However, the fortunes of the Middle East did not change even after the Cold War. The war has been continuously going on in the region for the last 20 years. Regional tensions are still witnessed in various countries like Libya, Yemen, and Syria. Civil war is still going on in Syria and Yemen. More than a decade has passed since the onset of the Syrian war. However, it seems that these regional conflicts are gradually coming to an end, as Syria's Bashar al-Assad is gaining acceptance in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia seems to be fighting alone in Yemen. The effect of these prolonged conflicts has been that the regional and global powers are now feeling exhausted. It means that a new geopolitical environment is now taking shape in the region. Now we will try to understand how Middle East geopolitics is taking a new shape these days. There have been some recent changes which indicate that the relations of the US with the Middle Eastern countries are deteriorating rapidly these days. The US is considered to have a good hold in the Middle East from a geopolitical point of view, but two recent incidents have negated this concept. The two incidents are the recent visit of US President Joe Biden to the Middle East and the visit of the presidents of Russia and Türkiye to Iran. First of all, let us discuss Biden's visit to the Middle East. It was Joe Biden's first visit to the Middle East after becoming the US president. During this visit, he visited Israel and Saudi Arabia. President Biden called on major oil-producing countries, including Saudi Arabia, to increase oil production and cut ties with Russia at the summit held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. However, Joe Biden's appeal went in vain. Despite Biden's pleas and pleasures, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt have not indicated that they may stop collaborating with Moscow in terms of energy and trade. Earlier, when the Russia-Ukraine war was started, then the US had asked Saudi Arabia and the UAE to increase oil production, but they flatly refused to the US request. It clearly indicates that there is a lack of trust between the US and its allies in the Middle East. Ignoring the US request of increasing oil production is okay, but rejecting the US appeal of ending cooperation with Russia is being seen as a major geopolitical change in the Middle East. Actually, Saudi Arabia was on the US side during the Cold War in the 1980s. It had also aided the US in chasing the Soviet army out of Afghanistan, and at one time it had even reduced the oil prices under US pressure. However, the US allies in the Middle East have now put up the reputation of the US at stake. The US allies in the Middle East have started ignoring the US due to the humiliating withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan and its precarious behavior over the past 2 decades. Besides, they have also questioned the strategic ability of the US and its survival as a superpower. Now, let us try to understand the implication of the second incident. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Türkiye President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Tehran, the capital of Iran, to discuss the Syrian issue. It is well known that Iran is a staunch adversary of the US. During this visit, Türkiye signed new agreements with Iran and Russia, the adversaries of the US. Türkiye even offered to sell arms to Iran. NATO allies refused to sell air defense systems to Türkiye, and as a result, Türkiye decided to purchase the air defense system from Russia, which is the adversary of both NATO and the US. Türkiye has made a deal with Russia for the S-400 system despite the US sanctions. India had already purchased the Russian S-400 systems. Saudi Arabia is also purchasing S-400 systems from Russia. Hence, the problems of the US in the Middle East seem to be increasing even more. However, this entire issue needs to be seen and understood beyond the declining credibility of the US in the Middle East and the increasing stature of the adversaries of the US. Earlier, the Middle Eastern countries generally used to be a part of one camp. They were either on the US side or the Russian side. However, recent incidents are indicating that the Middle Eastern countries are now turning towards mixed politics and relations. Although these countries are giving less importance to the US, they have not ended their ties with the US. These countries are refusing to heed the advice of the US, but they are still signing arms deals with it. Basically, these countries want to keep their options open at all times. They don't want to be confined to one camp anymore. Israel, one of the most trusted allies of the US, is also now inching closer to Russia. The whole world saw Israel's activeness in resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We have already discussed about Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Like these countries, Iran also wants to keep its options open. On the one hand, Iran is always ready to cooperate with Europe, and on the other hand, it also wants to negotiate with the US to reinstate the nuclear deal. Furthermore, Iran also wants to ally with China and Russia. Moreover, Iran and Saudi Arabia are arch enemies because of the US-Russia camp. However, they are also involved in direct diplomatic talks to de-escalate tensions in the Gulf and countries like Yemen, Syria and Lebanon. On the other hand, the UAE also restored its ties with Assad and pulled itself out of the Yemen war. The UAE was part of a Saudi-led coalition in the Yemen war. Besides, it also has established diplomatic, security and strategic ties with Israel, a staunch adversary of the Arabs. Overall, the atmosphere of politics in Arab countries is changing now. A new kind of politics has begun in the Middle East, and the US is no longer a big player in the politics of the region. On the other hand, the Middle Eastern countries are now keeping their options open for alliance with any country in the world. In such a scenario, it will be interesting to see how sustainable the strategy of the Middle Eastern countries prove to be and what are the impacts of it on global politics. Now, in the next segment of the Sunday special episode of Around the World, we will discuss some other important international news. It has been announced to start INSTC, that is, International North-South Transport Corridor, the ambitious project connecting Russia and India via Iran on a pilot mode. The commissioning of the corridor will reduce the logistics cost between Russia and India by 30% and travel time about 45%. This corridor is a 7,200 km long transport network consisting of rail, road and sea routes. The corridor, which has been in the pipeline for more than 2 decades, is considered cardinal for trade between Russia, which is facing Western sanctions, and South and Southeast Asia. By 2030, INSTC is expected to transport approximately 25 million tons of freight per year, which is 75% of the total transportation between Eurasia, South Asia and Gulf. Russia has decided to opt out of the ISS, that is International Space Station, and build its own space station after 2024. The announcement was made by Yuri Borisov, the newly appointed Director General of the Russian space agency Roscosmos, at a time when Russia is facing tough Western sanctions. NASA has also announced to replace the ISS, International Space Station, with a new station by 2030. The International Space Station is a joint space program of Europe, US, Russia, Canada and Japan. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping have agreed to mutual talks for the first time in the last 4 months amid new tensions regarding Taiwan. The information was provided by a top official of the US. According to this officer, these talks are likely to conclude before the possible visit of US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. The visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan was scheduled for April 2022. Her visit to Taiwan was strongly opposed by China. However, her visit to Taiwan was postponed as she got infected with COVID. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is visiting EU countries for the first time after the assassination of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. The US and Western intelligence agencies had held Crown Prince Salman responsible for Khashoggi's murder. Crown Prince Salman's last official visit outside the Middle East was to Japan, where he had attended the G20 Summit 2019. EU visit is his first official visit outside the Middle East after 2019. He visited Greece and France during this week. On his EU visit, he went to Greece, Türkiye's adversary, and signed an agreement with it on energy and military cooperation. Now, let us look at the question based on today's story. Why is the US hold weakening amidst the changing politics in the Middle East? Evaluate.